The cracked silver watch hit the counter before the man did. It slid across the scarred pine, stopped against the guest ledger, and trembled there in the yellow heat of the afternoon. The glass was split from 11 to 4. The second hand had not moved in years, but the case had once been fine, and even ruined. It was the last valuable thing. Gideon Vale had not sold, lost, or buried. He stood in the doorway of the Blue Lantern boarding house in Mercy Bend, Wyoming Territory, with dust on his boots and blood dried dark along one cuff. Behind him, the street shimmered under an August sun. A mule team groaned past the livery. Somewhere down the block, a hammer struck iron again and again, each blow ringing like a warning. Behind the counter, Wren Liao looked at the watch. Then she looked at the man. He wore black, but not the clean black of a card-sharp or undertaker. His coat had been bleached brown at the shoulders. His hat brim was cracked from weather. His gun rode low on his right hip, oiled and ready, like it had been used often enough to stop being decoration. His eyes were worse than the gun, not cruel, not wild, just emptied out as if every town he had ridden through had taken one more piece from him and given nothing back. "I need a room," he said. His voice sounded dragged over stone. "The cheapest corner you've got." Wren did not touch the watch. The ledger in front of her showed 3 empty rooms. The cheapest was the narrow back room under the stairs, where the ceiling trapped heat and the walls smelled faintly of old damp wood. Men with no choices slept there, men with no names, men who left before sunrise and were forgotten by breakfast. Room 6 was different. Room 6 sat above the front porch. It had 2 windows, one facing the street and one facing the creek road. At sunset, a breeze moved through it if the day had any mercy at all. It was the room she saved for traveling doctors, rail agents, and women with children who needed sleep more than pride. Her hand moved to the hook for room 6. "Gideon saw it." I said cheapest. "I heard you." Wren set the key on the counter. Then she pushed the cracked watch back toward him. "You can keep that," she said. "Room 6 is $2. Tonight it is 1. Breakfast is included." His face did not change, but his fingers stayed on the edge of the counter a little too long. He was used to doors closing when he reached them. He was used to hands drifting toward shotguns. He was used to clerks asking for payment first and names second, if they cared for names at all. He was not used to being given the best room in a house by a woman who looked like she could not afford a mistake. Wren could not afford one. The Blue Lantern had been built by her husband, Nathan Hart, with his own hands and a stubbornness that had outlived him by only 11 months. Fever had taken him in winter. The town had sent flowers because Nathan had been white, respectable, and useful. They had sent silence to Wren because she was Chinese, widowed, and still standing behind a counter they thought should have passed to someone else. The deed was legal. The town's respect was not, and Jasper Corliss knew the difference. Corliss owned the freight yard, the hay press, half the wagons on Main Street, and enough private debts to make honest men speak softly when he entered a room. For months he had been leaning on Wren without ever putting both hands where anyone could see them. A flour delivery went missing. Kerosene doubled in price. A county notice arrived 3 weeks early. A rumor spread that the Blue Lantern was unsafe for families. Now every invoice on her desk felt like a stone placed on her chest. Still, when Gideon Vale stood in front of her with a stopped watch and a face full of road hunger, she did not give him the room under the stairs. She gave him air. She gave him light. She gave him one night in a place that did not treat him like a loaded gun with boots. He took the key for a moment. He looked as if he might say something. Instead, he closed his hand around the brass tag, picked up the watch, and climbed the stairs without another word. Wren watched him go. It was not charity, not entirely. A charitable woman could be ruined in Mercy Bend before supper. It was a wager. She had seen men who wanted trouble. They announced it with swagger, with whiskey breath, with laughter too loud for the room. Gideon Vale carried trouble differently. He carried it like a sack of stones he was too tired to set down. A man like that might rob her, or he might remember the first door that opened. The trouble came before breakfast. Wren had just set coffee on the stove when the front windows darkened. At first she thought a storm cloud had moved over the sun. Then she stepped onto the porch and saw Jasper Corliss's freight wagon standing crosswise in front of the blue lantern, blocking the steps from post to post. 6 barrels of lamp oil sat in the wagon bed. 2 of Corliss's drivers were crouched beside the rear axle, grunting and swearing as if the whole world had conspired against them. A family in a buckboard slowed near the hitching rail, saw the blockage, and kept going. Wren folded her hands. One of the drivers smiled without looking up. "Bad luck, Mrs. Hart," he said. "Wheel froze solid. Move it, soon as we can." There was no urgency in him. By the time Jasper Corliss arrived, half the street had found a reason to watch. He came on a tall bay horse, heavy in the shoulders, wearing a cream linen coat too fine for freight work. His cheeks were red from sun and good meals. His smile was wide enough to hold a lie without spilling it. "Mrs. Hart," he called, stepping down from the saddle. "Now this is a rotten inconvenience. My boys will make it right as fast as possible. That wagon is blocking my business." "Yes," Corliss said, turning so the onlookers could hear. "And that is exactly why I keep telling you this place is too much burden for one woman. There is no shame in accepting a fair offer before the burdens become embarrassments." Wren felt the heat of the street on her face. She also felt every eye measuring her. Too small, too foreign, too alone. That was how Corliss liked a crowd. He made them feel like witnesses when he was really using them as weight. Then the porch boards creaked behind her. Gideon Vale stepped outside with a cup of coffee in one hand. He had shaved. He had washed the dust from his face. The black coat was still worn, but in the clean morning light he looked less like a drifter and more like a man cut from old iron. He said nothing. He only leaned against the porch post and looked at the wagon. The drivers stopped pretending to work. Corliss's smile did not disappear, but it tightened. "I did not know you had company," he said. "A guest," Wren replied. Gideon set the coffee on the porch rail and walked down the steps. No one moved out of his way because he asked. They moved because he did not. He crouched by the rear wheel, studied the hub, then reached into the dust beneath the axle and picked up a small iron pin. He held it up between 2 fingers. "Wheel's not frozen," he said. The street went quiet. Gideon turned the pin so the morning light caught the fresh scratches along its side. Brake pin was pulled out clean. See the marks? Somebody used tongs, then dropped it in the dirt. One of the drivers went pale. A murmur moved through the crowd. Wren saw Corliss glance at the onlookers, calculating how quickly the story had changed shape. A broken wagon made him unfortunate. A pulled brake pin made him obvious. "That man does not know my equipment," Corliss snapped. Gideon looked at the drivers. "Put it back." The words were low. They worked better than shouting. The men scrambled. The pin went into place. The wagon shifted, creaked, and rolled forward within minutes, taking its barrels and its excuse with it. Corliss mounted his bay, As he turned the horse, Gideon saw the mark burned into the animal's flank, a crescent moon cut by 3 short slashes. His hand went still. He had seen that brand 14 days earlier at Crow Wash, stamped on the horses that carried off the payroll strongbox after an overland stage was hit before dawn. 2 guards had died in the dust. Gideon had reached the wash too late to save them, but not too late to see the riders vanish into the ravine, every one of their horses carrying that same moon. Cut brand, he had told the deputy marshal. The deputy had told a saloon full of men that Gideon Vale must have been involved, because men who arrive late to robberies are never innocent for long. Now that Brand was leaving Main Street under Jasper Corliss, the freight boss was not only trying to crush a widow, he was hiding a robbery outfit inside a legal business, and Gideon had just called him a cheat in front of the town. That night, the Blue Lantern was quieter than it should have been. Word had spread fast, but courage had not. People who privately enjoyed seeing Corliss embarrassed were careful not to be seen rewarding the woman who embarrassed him. Wren served supper to 1 guest. Gideon sat at the small table nearest the kitchen. She brought him chicken with ginger, rice cooked in broth, and coffee dark enough to stand a spoon in. He ate slowly, as if his body did not trust food to remain available. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was the sound of 2 people deciding whether the truth could survive being said aloud. Finally Gideon set down his fork. Why room 6? Wren did not pretend not to understand. My husband believed you learn most about a person when they are offered power over someone weaker. I was not stronger than you last night. You had a gun? I had a ledger full of debts. That is not the same thing. No, she said. It is worse. A gun is honest about what it is. He looked at her then. Wren stood, went to the front desk, and returned with a leather folder tied in green cord. She laid the contents out with the care of a woman placing bones on a table. The deed to the Blue Lantern, 3 freight invoices, each one higher than the last. A county tax warning stamped before the payment date had even passed. A copy of a rail survey that placed the proposed depot road within 30 yards of her back fence. Corliss wants this corner, she said, not because he loves old pine walls, because when the depot road comes through, every wagon, rider, mail pouch, and passenger will pass my porch before they reach his yard. Gideon studied the papers. The pressure was neat. That made it crueler. A man with a gun could be stopped by another gun. A man with invoices, roomers, taxes, drivers, and judges who owed him favors could make a person disappear while everyone insisted no crime had occurred. Wren folded her hands in her lap. So yes, she said, I made a calculation. I saw a tired man who still noticed everything. I gave him the best room because I needed one person in Mercy Bend to remember I was human before Corliss convinced them I was only a problem. The words should have sounded desperate. They did not. They sounded expensive, like she had paid for every syllable before Gideon could answer. A horse stopped outside. Not the loose clatter of a drunk rider, the controlled stop of a man arriving with purpose. Bootsteps crossed the porch. The door opened. A marshal stood in the lamplight, tall and narrow, with rain dust on his coat, and a badge pinned over his heart. His eyes moved over the room once, and found Gideon. "Gideon Vale," he said. Gideon did not reach for his gun. Wren did not breathe. The marshal took one step in. "I have a warrant out of Cheyenne, assault on a deputy, suspicion of murder connected to the Crowash payroll robbery." Then Jasper Corliss appeared behind him, hat in hand, face arranged into wounded civic duty. "Marshal," Corliss said, "I regret to say this is the fellow I told you about. Dangerous man. Came into town under suspicious circumstances. I feared for Mrs. Hart's safety the moment I saw him." The room seemed to shrink. Gideon could see the trap in all its clean parts. Corliss did not need to shoot him. He only needed the law to carry him away. By morning the Blue Lantern would be alone again. By winter the deed would change hands, and everyone in Mercy Bend would say events had simply taken their course. The marshal's hand rested near his holster. "Stand up slow," he said. "Unbuckle the gun belt." Gideon looked at Wren. He expected fear. He expected calculation. He expected the sensible silence of a woman who had already risked too much. Wren rose from her chair. "This man is not Gideon Vale," she said. Corliss blinked. The marshal turned toward her. Wren's voice stayed level. "His name is Mr. Grant. He is a carpenter I hired to repair the porch roof and the east shutters. He arrived yesterday before dusk." Corliss laughed once, sharp and ugly. "That is a lie." Wren looked at him, then back at the marshal. "The man you want came here for water 2 days ago. He wore black? Yes. He had a cracked watch. He rode north toward the Badlands before sunrise." The marshal studied her. "Mrs. Hart lying to a federal officer is not a misunderstanding. It is a crime. I understand. Do you?" "Yes," Wren said. "I have had many chances to learn what the law protects and what it merely watches." The silence after that was dangerous. Gideon felt something move in his chest, something old and buried under years of dust. He had seen men lie for money, for blood, for cowardice, for pride. He had never seen someone lie because the truth had been rigged by a man with better clothes. The marshal looked from Wren's steady face to Corliss's hungry one. Then he looked at Gideon's hands, flat on the table. A good lawman notices what a guilty man does. A better one notices who benefits from his guilt. At last the marshal stepped back. "I will ride north at first light," he said. "If I learn you have misled me, Mrs. Hart, I will return. I will be here." The marshal touched the brim of his hat and left. Corliss did not move for a moment. His face had gone pale under the red. "You have chosen badly," he said to Wren. "No," she replied. "I chose openly." After he was gone, the room held its breath. Gideon stood slowly. "You should not have done that." Wren gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. "You should not have had to prove a wheel was broken on purpose. That is not the same." "No," she said, tying the cord. "It is worse. I can still choose who I become while they are trying to take what I own." Near midnight, Gideon woke to the smell of kerosene. At first it came thin through the floorboards, easy to mistake for the lamp downstairs. Then came the scrape of glass. He was out of bed before the second sound. He did not put on his boots. He did not light a lamp. He took the gun from the chair, crossed the room in silence, and opened the hall door. Below, in the dark rear parlor where Wren kept the deed box, a shadow moved at the window. A hand reached in with an oil-soaked rag wrapped around a stick. Gideon came down the stairs like a knife leaving a sheath. The intruder heard him too late. Gideon caught him by the collar, slammed him against the wall, and pinned the man's wrist until the torch dropped harmlessly into the dirt outside. Wren appeared with a lantern, her hair loose around her shoulders, one hand gripping a kitchen cleaver. The man in Gideon's grasp was one of Corliss's drivers. At his belt hung a brass token stamped with the crescent and 3 slashes mark. In his pocket was a folded paper listing delivery stops along the Crow Wash Road. with times written beside them in a freight clerk's careful hand. Not rumor, not suspicion, a route sheet. Gideon looked at Wren. Now they had a piece of the hidden machine. At dawn, Gideon walked to the telegraph office. Every board on Main Street seemed to know his real name as he passed over it. He could feel curtains shift. He could feel the town holding itself back from him, afraid of what might happen next, and ashamed of needing it to happen. The telegraph clerk swallowed when Gideon entered. "I need a wire sent to the territorial governor's office in Cheyenne," Gideon said, "and another to the overland stage superintendent." The clerk looked at the gun on his hip. "Name?" Gideon placed the cracked watch on the counter between them. The watch had stopped at 4:17, the minute his brother died in a cavalry hospital 7 years before. Gideon had carried it through deserts, brawls, warrants, and weather, because it was the last proof he had once belonged to someone. "Gideon Vale," he said. The clerk's pencil froze. Gideon gave him everything: the Crow Wash robbery, the Crescent, and 3 slashes brand, the route sheet taken from Corliss's man, the staged wagon obstruction, the tax pressure on the Blue Lantern, the marshal's warrant, the fact that Jasper Corliss's freight outfit had been positioned on every road the stolen payroll could have used. He signed his real name at the bottom. It was not a safe thing, but safe things had brought Wren to the edge of losing everything. 2 weeks later, different law came to Mercy Bend. Not the kind that drank Corliss's whiskey, not the kind that owed him hay money. A federal investigator arrived with 3 deputies, 2 overland men, and a book of payroll serial numbers. They searched Corliss's freight yard before noon. By supper, they had found 6 marked bills under a false plank in the tack room, 3 saddles with altered brands, and a strong-box hinge buried behind the hay press. The town watched quietly as Jasper Corliss was brought out in irons. He did not look at Gideon. He looked at Wren, not with regret, with disbelief, as if he could not understand how a woman he had mistaken for an obstacle had become the door he could not force open. Autumn came gold to Mercy Bend. The cottonwoods along the creek lit up as if each leaf held a little sun. The heat went out of the porch boards. The Blue Lantern's sign was repainted in deep blue letters with a small lantern carved beside the name under it. In smaller words, the sign now read, "Liao and Vale Boarding House." The change had not happened in one grand declaration. It happened in repairs. First, Gideon fixed the east shutters, then the porch roof, then the loose railing that made guests step carefully near the stairs. Wren renegotiated freight through a rancher north of town and sent copies of every county notice to Cheyenne before the ink had time to threaten her. The overland stage line made the Blue Lantern an official meal and mail stop because Gideon knew the roads and Wren knew how to keep passengers fed, rested, and moving. Business did not boom, it steadied, and in a frontier town, steadiness could feel like a miracle. People came back slowly. A schoolteacher rented room 2 for a month. A doctor began taking supper there on Thursdays. Families who had once crossed the street to avoid choosing sides now stopped under the blue sign and pretended they had always meant to. Wren did not correct them. Survival sometimes requires allowing cowards to become neighbors again. One evening Gideon stood on a ladder outside room 6, fitting a new latch to the window that caught the creek wind. He still wore black, but the coat was clean, and the shoulders no longer sagged with road dust. His gun belt hung inside on a peg near the door. Wren came onto the porch carrying 2 cups of tea. "Careful," she said. That latch has already defeated better men." He looked down at her. The hard emptiness in his eyes had not vanished all at once. Things like that rarely do. But it had loosened. There was room now for light to get through. "I was never better men," he said. "No," Wren answered. "You were the one who stayed." He climbed down and took the cup from her. Inside, behind the front desk, the cracked silver watch hung in a small frame. Gideon had tried to put it away. Wren had put it where every guest could see it. The watch still did not run. That was the point. It marked the moment a man with nothing left was not treated like nothing. It marked the night a woman with everything to lose chose not to surrender her judgment to fear. And long after the town forgot the pulled brake pin, the false warrant, and the freight boss in irons, the blue lantern kept its light in the window, not because the world had become safe, but because one open door, offered at the right moment, can change who is willing to stand in it.